The galaxy had forgotten what humanity truly was, and that forgetfulness would soon cost them everything they held dear. 1,000 years had passed since the day humanity fell from the stars, defeated and broken by an alliance of three great empires that ruled the known universe with iron claws and cold hearts, the Velthari Dominion, with their sleek silver ships and their arrogance that stretched across 100 star systems, the Crossian Empire with their brutal warriors and their belief that strength was the only law that mattered, the Zinthari Collective, with their vast intelligence networks and their conviction that they could see everything and control everyone. These three powers had crushed humanity in a war that lasted only 5 years. A war that ended with Earth on its knees and billions of human souls scattered like dust in the cosmic wind. Admiral Daniel Carter sat alone in a room buried deep beneath the frozen surface of Europa, one of the moons of Jupiter, a place where no alien eye had ever looked and no alien sensor had ever reached. He was an old man now, his hair gray and his face lined with the weight of secrets that would have broken lesser men. But his eyes burned with a fire that had been passed down through 40 generations of his family. His great-great-grandfather had watched the surrender ceremony 1,000 years ago, had seen the alien admirals laugh as they stripped humanity of everything, and had sworn an oath that his descendants would one day make the galaxy remember why they should have finished the job. That oath had become a religion, passed from father to son and mother to daughter, kept alive in hidden bunkers and secret meetings while the rest of humanity learned to bow and scrape before their alien Masters. Commander Lisa Morgan entered the room without making a sound, her boots barely touching the metal floor as she approached the Admiral with a data tablet in her hand. She was young compared to Daniel, only 42 years old, but she had been raised in the same hidden world of preparation and patience, trained from childhood to be a weapon that would one day be unleashed. "The final reports are in," she said, her voice calm and steady despite the magnitude of what she was about to reveal. "All 12 fleets have completed their final preparations and every ship has been moved to launch positions throughout the outer system." Daniel took the tablet and scrolled through the information, his eyes scanning numbers that represented 1,000 years of secret work. 12,000 warships hidden in the shadows of moons and buried in the hearts of asteroids. 40 million soldiers trained in combat techniques that had been refined over centuries of careful study, weapons that no alien species had ever imagined, born from the desperate creativity of a people who had nothing left to lose. "And the hegemony suspects nothing?" he asked. Though he already knew the answer, Lisa shook her head slowly, a cold smile crossing her face for just a moment before disappearing. "They stopped truly watching us 300 years ago," she replied. "To them we are pets, harmless creatures who learned our lesson and accepted our place at the bottom of galactic society." She pulled up a holographic display that showed the current state of the galaxy, with the three great empires dividing everything between themselves while humanity occupied a tiny corner marked in a color that suggested insignificance. "The Velthari teach their children that humans are a cautionary tale about the dangers of ambition," Lisa continued. "The Crossians use our defeat as proof that only the strong deserve to exist. And the Zinthari have written papers about how our brains are simply not evolved enough to compete with superior species." Daniel stood up from his chair and walked to a window that looked out into the darkness of space, his reflection staring back at him like a ghost from the past. "My grandfather told me a story when I was a boy," he said quietly. "He told me about the day the aliens came to Earth after the surrender, how they walked through our cities and laughed at our monuments and our art and our history." He turned to face Liza with eyes that had grown hard as stone. One of the Velthari commanders stood in front of the Lincoln Memorial and asked his translator what the inscription meant. And when he was told that it honored a leader who freed slaves and preserved the Union, the commander laughed so hard that tears ran down his face. Daniel's hands curled into fists at his sides. He said that humans were now the slaves, and there was no one left to free them. And then he ordered his soldiers to tear the memorial down stone by stone, while the humans watching were forced to applaud. Lisa nodded because she had heard similar stories her entire life. Stories of humiliation and cruelty that had been carefully preserved so that future generations would never forget and never forgive. The galaxy believes we have accepted our fate, Daniel said as he walked back to the command console at the center of the room. They believe that 1,000 years of mockery has taught us to know our place. He pressed a button that activated screens all around the chamber, each one showing a different hidden location where human ships waited in silence. What they do not understand is that we have spent every moment of those 1,000 years preparing for this day, building weapons in places they never thought to look, training warriors in skills they never imagined we could master, and nurturing a hatred so pure and so patient that it has become something almost holy. Lisa stepped forward to stand beside him, her eyes reflecting the light of the screens. The Council has approved the final timeline, she said. Operation Remembrance begins in 72 hours. Daniel nodded slowly, feeling the weight of history pressing down on his shoulders like a physical force. Send word to all fleet commanders, he ordered. Tell them that the waiting is almost over, and tell them to remember the words that have been passed down since the day of our defeat. Lisa straightened her posture and spoke the words that every human in the Resistance had memorized before they could walk. We do not forgive and we do not forget. We simply wait until our enemies believe they are safe. And then we remind them why they should have been afraid. Daniel turned off the screens one by one until only darkness remained. The galaxy mocked us for a millennium, he said into the shadows. Now they will learn that some wounds never heal and some hatreds never die. And the species they dismissed as harmless has become something far more dangerous than they could ever imagine. Somewhere in the void between stars, 12,000 warships began powering up their engines for the first time in decades. Their crews moving to battle stations with the calm efficiency of people who had trained their entire lives for a moment they were never sure would come. The galaxy slept peacefully that night, secure in its belief that humans were a broken people who would never rise again. They had no idea that dawn was coming, and with it a reckoning that would shake the foundations of everything they thought they knew about the universe and their place in it. Humanity had not forgotten anything. Humanity had simply been waiting, and now the waiting was finally over. Captain Torvax of the Xanthari patrol vessel Glorious Purpose had served in the fleet for 37 years and had never once encountered anything that surprised him. The Xanthari were masters of information, collectors of secrets, watchers who saw everything that happened in the galaxy and used that knowledge to maintain their power over lesser species. Torvax had spent the last decade assigned to the patrol route near human-controlled space, a posting that was considered either a punishment or a vacation depending on how one looked at it. Nothing ever happened near human space because humans no longer had the ability or the will to cause trouble. They had learned their lesson 1,000 years ago and had accepted their role as the galaxy's favorite joke. A cautionary tale told to children about what happens when a primitive species reaches too far beyond its Graspervax was reviewing crew performance reports when his sensor officer made a sound that the captain had never heard before. Something between a gasp and a whimper that caused everyone on the bridge to turn and stare. Captain, the officer said with a voice that trembled like a leaf in a storm, I am detecting multiple contacts emerging from the shadow of the dead moon in Sector 7. Contacts that are not matching any known ship configurations in our database. Torvax rose from his command chair and walked to the sensor station, his four eyes narrowing as he studied the readings that made no sense at all. How many contacts? He demanded. The officer swallowed hard before answering. 417, Captain. And more are appearing every second. Torvax felt something cold settle into his stomach. A sensation he had not experienced since his first combat mission decades ago. That is impossible, he said firmly. The humans possess nothing larger than light cargo vessels. And our monitoring stations would have detected any military buildup before the sensor officer could respond. The communication system crackled to life with a transmission that broadcast on every frequency. Simultaneously, this is the Earth vessel reckoning. To all ships in this sector, said a human voice that carried no fear and no hesitation. Your kind has mocked humanity for 1,000 years, calling us weak and primitive and beneath your notice. Torvax stared at the main view screen as the largest warship he had ever seen emerged fully from the shadow of the moon. Its hull black as the void itself and bristling with weapons that his tactical computer could not even identify. Today, we begin teaching the galaxy a lesson it should have learned long ago. The voice continued. Humanity does not forget, and humanity does not forgive. And the species you dismissed as harmless has spent a millennium preparing for this moment. Torvax turned to his communication officer with desperate urgency. Send the priority alert to Zentari Command immediately, he ordered. Tell them that the humans have somehow acquired a military fleet and are engaging in hostile actions. The communication officer worked frantically at her console for several seconds, before looking up with terror in all four of her eyes. Captain, our transmissions are being blocked by some kind of jamming field. Nothing is getting through. On the view screen, the massive human warship turned slowly until its forward weapons were pointed directly at the glorious purpose. Torvax had always believed that humans were emotional creatures, prone to anger and fear and all the weaknesses that came with such primitive psychology, but the voice that spoke to him now carried none of those things. It was calm and cold and utterly without mercy. The voice of a predator that had waited in darkness for 1,000 years and was finally ready to feed. You will not send warnings, the voice said. You will not call for help, and you will not survive this encounter. But you will serve a purpose. Torvax found himself frozen in place, unable to move or speak as the human ship grew larger on his screen. You will be the first, the voice continued. The first to learn what happens when you mock a species for a millennium and assume they will never fight back. The weapons of the reckoning fired. And the glorious purpose is to exist in a flash of light that lasted less than a heartbeat across the galaxy on Earth. President Nathan Cole stood before a crowd of 100,000 people gathered in the rebuilt plaza where the Lincoln Memorial had once stood before alien hands tore it down. Giant screens surrounded the plaza, showing the faces of billions more humans watching from every corner of the solar system and from hidden colonies that the alien empires had never discovered. My fellow humans, Nathan began, his voice strong and steady. For 1,000 years, we have endured humiliation that would have broken any other species in the galaxy. He paused to let his words sink in. They burned our colonies and laughed while our children died. They tore down our monuments and forced us to applaud. They wrote in their history books that we were barely intelligent enough to be considered sentient. And they used our name as an insult throughout the stars. The crowd was silent. Every person present feeling the weight of generations of suffering pressing down upon them. Our ancestors made a choice after the defeat. Nathan continued. They could have truly surrendered and allowed humanity to fade into nothing. Or they could pretend to surrender while preparing in secret for the day when we would rise again. He raised his fist toward the sky, where the first human warships were even now engaging the enemy. They chose to fight, not with the reckless courage that lost us the first war, but with patience and cunning and a hatred so deep that it became part of our very souls. The screens behind him switched to show footage of the Tavadi reckoning destroying the Zentari patrol vessel, and a sound rose from the crowd that was part cheer and part something darker. The galaxy wanted us to be a lesson, Nathan said. They wanted other species to look at humanity and see what happens when you challenge the great powers. His eyes hardened as he stared into the cameras. We will be a lesson, but not the one they intended. We will teach the galaxy what happens when you humiliate a species for 1,000 years and assume they will never make you pay. He lowered his voice, but every word still carried to the farthest corners of human space, to the Velthari Dominion, the Crossian Empire, and the Zentari Collective. I say this. You created the enemy that now rises against you. Every warship in our fleet was built from the steel of your contempt. Every weapon was forged in the fire of your mockery. And every soldier carries 1,000 years of hatred in their heart. Nathan Cole smiled. But there was no warmth in it. You wanted to see what humans could become when pushed to the edge of extinction. Congratulations, you are about to find out in the command center beneath Europa. Admiral Daniel Carter watched the president's speech while monitoring reports from the first engagements. Across Human Space Commander Lisa Morgan stood beside him, tracking fleet movements on her console. The Zentari have lost contact with 17 patrol vessels so far, she reported. They still have not figured out what is happening. Daniel nodded slowly, his face showing no emotion. By the time they understand, it will be too late, he said. We spent 1,000 years preparing for this moment, and we will not waste it on half measures or mercy. He turned to address his command staff, men and women who had dedicated their entire lives to this single purpose. Our ancestors showed mercy in the First War, Daniel said. They accepted surrenders and treated prisoners with honor, and believed that their enemies would do the same. His voice grew cold. They were wrong, and 43 billion humans died because of that mistake. We will not repeat it. He pointed to the tactical display showing enemy positions across the galaxy. We will give them no quarter and accept no surrender. We will burn their fleets and shatter their empires, and make them understand that the humans they mocked for a millennium have become something they cannot defeat. Lisa looked at the destruction spreading across the stars and felt something like satisfaction settle into her chest. The galaxy will hate us for this, she said quietly. Daniel shrugged. Let them hate us, he replied, as long as they fear us. That is all that matters now. The second wave of human ships began launching from their hidden bases, and the war that would reshape the galaxy had truly begun. The Battle of Corvin Prime would be remembered for centuries as the moment when the galaxy finally understood what humanity had become. Admiral Daniel Carter stood on the bridge of the reckoning as his fleet dropped out of faster-than-light, traveled directly on top of the largest Centauri military installation. Outside their home system, 2,000 human warships materialized in perfect formation, their weapons already charging as confused enemy commanders scrambled to understand what was happening. The Zentari had expected trouble eventually. Their intelligence networks had finally pieced together rumors of human military activity, but they had estimated that the humans possessed perhaps 100 vessels at most. They were wrong by a factor of 20, and that miscalculation would cost them dearly. Commander Lisa Morgan worked the tactical console with the calm precision of someone who had trained for this moment since childhood. Enemy fleet is attempting to organize a defensive formation, she reported. They have approximately 800 combat vessels in the system, but most are still docked at the orbital stations. Daniel studied the display for a moment before issuing his orders. Target the docking facilities first, he said. Destroy their ability to launch reinforcements. Then we will deal with the ships already in space. The human fleet moved as one, each vessel knowing exactly where to go and what to do because they had practiced this attack 1,000 times in simulations. Plasma cannons that had been designed over centuries of secret development tore through Centauri shields like they did not exist. Missile barrages struck orbital stations with pinpoint accuracy, each warhead carrying enough destructive power to crack a small moon in half. The Zentari fought back with everything they had, but their weapons had been designed to fight enemies they understood. Enemies who followed predictable patterns and used familiar technologies. Human weapons were something entirely new, born from 1,000 years of studying their enemies and finding every weakness. Lisa watched the enemy fleet crumble on her display and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. The Zentari command ship is attempting to retreat, she announced. They are making for the jump point on the far side of the system. Daniel considered this for a moment. In the old wars, human commanders would have allowed retreating enemies to escape because that was considered honorable, but honor had gotten humanity enslaved for 1,000 years. And Daniel Carter was not interested in repeating old mistakes. No survivors, he ordered. Pursue and destroy. Let them send their distress calls. Let the whole galaxy hear them scream, but none of them leave this system alive. The human fleet surged forward like a pack of wolves chasing wounded. Praesenary captains begged for mercy over open channels, promising information and resources and anything else they could think of. Their pleas were ignored. Daniel watched the last enemy vessel explode and felt a grim sense of accomplishment settle into his chest. Corvin Prime is ours, Lisa reported. All enemy military assets have been eliminated. She paused and looked at the Admiral with an expression that held a question she was not sure she wanted to ask. The ground installations are surrendering, she continued. There are approximately 3 million Zentari civilians on the planetary surface. Daniel turned to face her directly. And what will you have me do with them? He asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. She was considering. Lisa thought about the stories she had been told her entire life. Stories of Zentari intelligence agents who had helped coordinate the orbital bombardment of human colonies 1,000 years ago. Colonies where children played and families gathered, and people lived their ordinary lives until fire fell from the sky. The Zentari killed 43 billion humans, she said quietly. They did not spare our civilians, Daniel nodded slowly. No, they did not, he agreed. But we are not going to become them. The civilians will be left alone. Our war is with their military and their government, not with farmers and shopkeepers who had no say in what happened 1,000 years ago. He turned back to the view screen. Besides, he added, we want them to tell stories about us. We want them to spread the word about what happened here today. Dead civilians cannot spread fear, but survivors can, on the Crossian homeworld of Crosser. Emperor Valdros received the news of Corvin Prime with a mixture of fury and growing dread. He sat in his throne room surrounded by his most trusted advisors, military commanders and intelligence officers, all of whom looked like they had seen a ghost. Explain to me how this is possible, Valdros demanded, his voice echoing off the ancient stone walls. The humans have been monitored for 1,000 years. How did they build a fleet capable of destroying an entire Zentari battle group in less than 6 hours? High Inquisitor Sareth stepped forward, his scales pale with fear. Majesty, we have been reviewing all available intelligence, he said carefully. It appears that the humans have been running a deception operation for centuries, perhaps since the very beginning of their defeat. Valdros leaned forward on his throne. Explained. Sareth activated a holographic display showing what they knew of human space. We monitored their main industrial centers and their primary population zones, he said. But the humans did not build their fleet in those locations. They built them in places we never thought to look. He highlighted various points in the display. Inside hollowed-out asteroids, beneath the ice sheets of frozen moons, in the crushing depths of gas giant atmospheres. They created entire shipyards in environments so hostile that our sensors could not penetrate them. Valdros stared at the display with growing horror. For how long? At least 800 years, Majesty. Possibly longer. The Emperor rose from his throne and walked to the window that overlooked his capital city. A city that had stood for 10,000 years and had never once faced a serious threat. Then we must unite the hegemony, he declared. Contact the Velthari and the Zentari. Tell them that old rivalries must be set aside. Together, we have the strength to crush this human rebellion. General Korath, commander of all Crossian military forces, spoke up from his position near the back of the room. Majesty, I must advise caution, he said. The humans have demonstrated capabilities that we did not know they possessed. Their weapons cut through Zentari shields like they were made of paper, and their tactics suggest decades of careful planning. Valdros turned to face his general with anger in his eyes. Are you suggesting we surrender to a species we conquered 1,000 years ago? Korath shook his head. I am suggesting that we learn more about what we are facing before we commit our forces, he replied. The humans we defeated in the first war were emotional and disorganized. They made mistakes born from anger and fear. But these humans are different. He pointed to the battle footage from Corvin Prime. Look at their formation discipline. Look at the precision of their targeting. Look at how they coordinate their movements. These are not the same humans we fought before. These are predators who have been sharpening their claws in the darkness for a cause. Millennium. Valdros dismissed the general's concerns with a wave of his claw. They are still humans, he insisted. A species of primitives who managed to build some impressive weapons. Once the full might of the hegemony is brought to bear, they will fall just as they did before. But even as he spoke the words, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered that he might be wrong on the Velthari homeworld. High Counselor Vereth received the same reports and felt the same dread she had grown up hearing stories about the human defeat. Stories that painted humanity as a bumbling species that had overreached and paid the price. But the footage from Corvin Prime told a different story. It showed a species that had learned from its mistakes, that had spent 1,000 years, becoming something harder and colder and more dangerous than anything it had been before. They planned this from the beginning, she murmured, as she watched the battle footage for the 10th time. They never truly surrendered. They simply made us believe they had. Her chief advisor stood nearby, his silver skin pale with worry. High Counselor, what do we do? Vereth turned off the display and stared at the blank screen for a long moment. We prepare for war, she said finally. And we pray that 1,000 years of mockery has not created an enemy we cannot defeat. Somewhere in the darkness between stars, Admiral Daniel Carter received word that the three great powers were mobilizing their forces for a unified response. He smiled coldly. Good, he said to Lisa Morgan. Let them come together. Let them pool their resources and their fleets. It will be more efficient to destroy them all at once. Lisa looked at the tactical projections showing enemy movements across the galaxy. They have numerical superiority, she pointed out. Even with our technological advantages, this will not be easy. Daniel nodded. Nothing worth doing is easy, he replied. But we have something they do not have, something they cannot understand and cannot match. What is that? Daniel turned to face her with eyes that had seen too much and carried too much weight. 1,000 years of hatred, he said, refined into something pure and sharp and unbreakable. They fight because they want to maintain their power. We fight because we want to make them pay for every insult and every humiliation and every life they took from us. He pointed to the stars on the view screen. That is why we will win. Because they have something to lose and we have nothing left but vengeance. Fleet Admiral Kevin Hayes led the second wave of the human offensive deep into the heart of Velthari space. His task force of 3,000 warships emerging from hidden jump points that the enemy had never discovered. He was a younger man than Daniel Carter, only 52 years old. But he had been raised in the same tradition of patient hatred and careful preparation his grandfather had been a child when the aliens bombed the colony of New Hope, killing 8 million people, including his parents and everyone he had ever known. That grandfather had survived by hiding in a drainage tunnel for 3 days while the fires burned above him. And he had passed down the memory of those flames to every generation that followed. Kevin carried that memory now as he stared at the Valkyrie shipyards of Nexer Station, the largest military construction facility in the known galaxy. Commander Amy Sullivan stood beside him, monitoring tactical data on her console with the calm focus of someone who had trained for this mission her entire life. "The Valkyrie are scrambling their defense fleet," she reported. "Approximately 400 vessels currently combat ready, with another 600 still in dock undergoing maintenance." Kevin nodded slowly as he studied the enemy positions. "They expected us to consolidate after Corvum Prime," he said. "They thought we would pause to secure our gains and negotiate from a position of strength." Amy glanced at him with a question in her eyes. "Is that not the rational strategy?" Kevin smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Perhaps," he admitted, "if we were interested in rationality, but we are not fighting this war to be rational. We are fighting it to make sure the galaxy never forgets what happens when you push humanity too far." He turned to his communication officer. "Open a channel to the enemy command ship. I want to speak with whoever is in charge." The view screen flickered and revealed the face of Valkyrie Admiral Torrent, a decorated officer who had spent his career maintaining order in the outer territories. "Human vessel," Torrent said with obvious disdain. "You have made a grave error by entering Valkyrie space. Surrender now, and your crews will be treated according to the conventions of civilized warfare." Kevin laughed, a sound that made his bridge crew shift uncomfortably. "Civilized warfare," he repeated. "That is interesting terminology coming from a species that bombarded 17 human colonies from orbit." He leaned forward in his command chair. "Admiral Torrance, your government has sent us a peace proposal. Did you know that? They are offering to recognize human sovereignty and return our colonial territories and pay reparations for what they call historical injustices." Torrance's expression suggested that he had not been informed of any such proposal. "If peace has been offered, then why are you here?" The Valkyrie demanded. Kevin's smile faded. "Because we are not interested in peace," he said simply. "Your leaders think they can pay us off with territory and credits, as if 1,000 years of humiliation can be erased with a few diplomatic gestures." He stood up from his chair and walked closer to the view screen. "Let me explain something to you, Admiral, something your government does not understand. We did not build these ships because we wanted our colonies back. We did not train for a millennium because we wanted compensation." His eyes hardened into something that made even his own crew feel a chill. "We built these ships because we wanted to watch you burn. We trained for 1,000 years because we wanted to hear you beg for mercy the way our ancestors begged. And we came here today because we wanted to teach your children what it feels like to lose everything." Torrance's face had gone pale, his confidence draining away as he finally began to understand what he was facing. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Kevin turned to Amy Sullivan. "Tell them what we want." "Commander," Amy stepped forward with an expression as cold as her admiral's. "We want fear," she said. "We want your species to wake up every night wondering if this is the night the humans come for them. We want your children to grow up knowing that the galaxy is not safe. We want you to spend the next 1,000 years looking over your shoulder." She paused. "That is the only currency we accept." Kevin turned back to the view screen. "You have 30 seconds to transmit your surrender." "Admiral, after that, this conversation is over." Torrance stared at him for a long moment, his mind racing through options that did not exist. "We will never surrender to primitives," he finally said. Though his voice lacked conviction, Kevin shrugged. "I was hoping you would say that." He turned to his weapons officer. "Target the shipyard facilities. Primary batteries full power, fire at will. Nexus Station had taken 400 years to build, a testament to Velthari engineering and their dominance over the stars. It took the human fleet less than 2 hours to reduce it to burning. Wreckage Kevin watched the destruction without expression. His mind focused on the tactical situation rather than the spectacle. Admiral Tarn's vessel has been destroyed, Amy reported. The remaining enemy ships are attempting to flee. Kevin nodded. Let some of them escape, he ordered. We need witnesses to tell the story of what happened here. He paused, but only some of them. The rest we hunt down and destroy on Earth. The Global Council met in emergency session to discuss the progress of the war and the moral implications of their campaign. Dr. Scott Palmer, a historian who had dedicated his life to studying the First Galactic War, addressed the assembly with passion in his voice. I understand that some of you are concerned about the tactics we are employing, he said. I understand that watching enemy stations burn makes you uncomfortable. He activated a display showing images from 1,000 years ago. Images that every human child learned in school. This is what remains of the colony of New Hope after the Velthari orbital bombardment, he said. 8 million people, including 2 million children, killed in a single afternoon because the aliens decided that human lives were worthless. The council members stared at the images in silence. This is the colony of Bright Future, destroyed by the Crossians because they wanted to test a new weapon system. 14 million dead, including the entire population of 3 major cities. Scott switched to another image. This is the colony of Haven's Rest, where the Zentari released a biological agent that killed every human over the age of 15. The children were left alive so they could be taken as slaves. He turned off the display and faced the council directly. I hear concerns about proportionality, he said. I hear whispers that we are becoming monsters. But I would remind this council that we did not start this war 1,000 years ago. And we did not choose the rules by which it was fought. His voice grew harder. Our ancestors surrendered in good faith. They laid down their weapons and trusted that their enemies would show mercy. They believed in the basic decency of other civilized species. He paused to let the words sink in. They were wrong. And billions of humans paid for that mistake with their lives. Scott walked to the center of the chamber and looked around at the assembled leaders. We are not monsters, he declared. We are simply people who have learned the lesson that our ancestors refused to accept. The galaxy does not respect kindness. It does not reward mercy. It only understands power and fear. He pointed toward the sky. Our fleets are teaching that lesson now. And when this war is over, no species in the galaxy will ever again think of humans as easy targets. President Nathan Cole rose from his seat at the head of the council table. Dr. Palmer is correct, he said. I know that what we are doing is hard. I know that it goes against everything we would prefer to believe about ourselves. He walked to the window and looked down at the city beyond, rebuilt from the ruins of 1,000 years ago. But we have a responsibility to the generations that came before us, the ones who suffered and died so that we could have this chance. And we have a responsibility to the generations that will come after, the ones who will inherit whatever galaxy we leave behind. Nathan turned back to face the council. I will not allow our descendants to be mocked and humiliated for another millennium. I will not allow them to live in fear of species that view them as nothing more than animals. His jaw tightened with determination. Whatever it takes, whatever it costs, we will make sure that humanity is never again seen as weak. And if the galaxy hates us for it, then let them hate us. He raised his hand in a gesture that had become the symbol of the human resistance. As long as they fear us, that is all that matters in the darkness of space. Kevin Hayes received word that the Velthari government had requested peace negotiations. He read the message and deleted it without responding. The time for peace would come. Eventually, but not until the lesson was complete. 4 years had passed since the first human warship emerged from the shadows, and the war had transformed the galaxy into something unrecognizable. Admiral Daniel Carter stood on the observation deck of the Reckoning, now the flagship of the largest military force the universe had ever seen. Watching as his fleet assembled in orbit above the Velthari homeworld, the view was breathtaking and terrible at the same time. Thousands of human warships hung in perfect formation, their black hulls blocking out the stars, their weapons charged and ready to deliver the final blow if the enemy refused to submit. The Zenthari Collective had fallen first, their government dissolving into chaos after human forces demonstrated the ability to appear anywhere at any time without warning their intelligence networks. Once the pride of their civilization had proven useless against an enemy who had spent 1,000 years learning how to be invisible, the Crossian Empire had lasted longer, their warrior culture refusing to accept defeat, even as their fleets were systematically destroyed. It was not until human scientists demonstrated their ability to destabilize stars, a technology that no other species had ever developed, that Emperor Valdros finally agreed to surrender. The demonstration had been simple but effective. A minor star in an uninhabited system, pushed just slightly out of balance, had exploded into a supernova that destroyed everything within 3 light years. Message was clear: humanity could exterminate entire species if they chose to do so, and the only thing preventing them was their own restraint. Now only the Velthari remained, their homeworld surrounded by an enemy fleet that could reduce their entire civilization to ash. In a matter of hours, Commander Lisa Morgan stepped onto the observation deck and stood beside the Admiral, a reflection visible in the transparent viewport. "The Velthari have accepted our terms," she said quietly. "High Counselor Verath will sign the surrender documents within the hour." Daniel nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settling onto his shoulders. "And what are you feeling?" he asked without turning to face her. Lisa considered the question for a long time before answering. "I thought I would feel satisfaction," she admitted. "I spent my entire life preparing for this day, dreaming of the moment when our enemies would kneel before us." She paused. "But now that it is here, I just feel tired." Daniel understood exactly what she meant. "We have won," he said. "The galaxy will never mock us again. They will never look at humanity as a joke or a cautionary tale. They will look at us and remember what we did here." He turned to face her with eyes that held the weight of 1,000 years. "But we have also lost something. Something that our ancestors had before the First War. Something that made them believe that the universe could be a place of friendship and cooperation rather than fear and domination." Lisa looked at him with surprise. "Do you regret what we have done?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "No," he said firmly. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that the galaxy forced us to become what we are. But I do not regret the choices we made." He pointed out the viewport at the assembled fleet. "Every one of those ships represents a promise kept to the generations who suffered before us. Every weapon is a monument to the children who died on New Hope and Bright Future and all the other colonies that the aliens burned." His voice grew hard. "We owed them a reckoning, and we have delivered it on the surface of the Velthari homeworld." President Nathan Cole stepped off his shuttle and walked toward the grand hall where the surrender ceremony would take place. The city around him was untouched by the war, its towers gleaming in the afternoon sun, its streets filled with Velthari, civilians who watched the human delegation with a mixture of fear and resentment. Nathan ignored them, his focus on the building ahead and the moment that would define the future of his species. High Counselor Verath waited at the entrance, her silver skin pale and her posture rigid with barely contained emotion. "President Cole," she said formally. "Welcome to Veltharis." Nathan nodded without smiling. "High Counselor, I believe you have documents to sign." Vareth led him into the hall where representatives from all three former hegemony powers waited, their faces showing various degrees of defeat and anger. Nathan walked to the podium at the center of the room and looked out at the assembled aliens, the species that had once ruled the galaxy and now knelt before humanity. 1,000 years ago, he began. Your ancestors defeated mine in a war that should have been the end of humanity. He paused to let the words echo through the silent hall. They could have chosen mercy. They could have treated us as equals and welcomed us into the galactic community. They could have shown us that there was a place for humanity among the stars. His voice grew colder. Instead, they chose humiliation. They chose to mock us and belittle us, and teach their children that we were nothing more than primitive animals who had overreached. Nathan looked directly at Vareth. Your comedians made jokes about human intelligence. Your scholars wrote papers about our evolutionary deficiencies. Your leaders used our defeat as proof that some species were simply meant to rule and others were meant to serve. He smiled. But there was no warmth in it. You wanted humanity to be a lesson for the galaxy. Congratulations. We are. Nathan stepped back from the podium and gestured toward the documents on the table before him. These agreements will strip your species of military capability for the next 500 years. Your fleets will be reduced to defensive patrol vessels. Your weapons research will be monitored by human inspectors. And any attempt to rebuild your power will be met with immediate and overwhelming response. He watched as Vareth's hands trembled while she reached for the signing device. I know you hate us, Nathan said quietly. I know you will spend the next millennium plotting your revenge and dreaming of the day when you can make us pay for what we have done here. He leaned closer to her. Good. That is exactly what we want. We want you to lie awake at night, thinking about humanity. We want your children to grow up knowing that there is a species out there that cannot be defeated and cannot be mocked. Vareth signed the documents with visible reluctance, her eyes burning with hatred that she could not quite conceal. You have made enemies today, she said in a voice barely above a whisper. Enemies who will never forget and never forgive. Nathan straightened and looked around the hall at all the alien faces staring at him. We know, he replied. We learned that lesson from you 1,000 years ago. He turned and walked toward the exit, pausing at the doorway to deliver his final words. Remember this moment. Remember what you created. You wanted to see what humans could become when pushed to the edge of extinction. His voice echoed through the hall like a death sentence. Now, you know. And if you ever again think of us as prey, we will return, not with fleets, not with armies, but with extinction in orbit above the planet. Admiral Daniel Carter received word that the ceremony was complete. He stared out at the stars for a long time, thinking about everything that had been won and everything that had been lost. Lisa Morgan stood beside him in silence, understanding that some moments required no words. The galaxy will hate us for this, Daniel finally said. They will write histories about human cruelty and human vengeance. They will teach their children that we are monsters. Lisa nodded slowly. Does that bother you? Daniel considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. My great-grandmother used to tell me stories about the time before the First War, he said. She talked about a humanity that dreamed of friendship with other species, that believed in cooperation and mutual respect, and all the ideals that seem so naive now. He turned to face Lisa with eyes that held both sadness and determination. That humanity died 1,000 years ago, killed by species who saw our kindness as weakness and our mercy as stupidity. He gestured at the fleet assembled around them. We are what remains. Harder and colder and more dangerous than anything our ancestors could have imagined. We have guaranteed that humanity will never again be victimized. His voice dropped. But we have also guaranteed that we will never truly have peace. Only the absence of war. Only the quiet that comes when everyone is too afraid to speak. Lisa placed her hand on his shoulder. Is that enough? Daniel watched as the Velthari homeworld slowly receded in the viewport. A world that would now live in fear of the species it had once mocked. "It will have to be," he said quietly, "because it is all we have left, somewhere in the vast darkness between stars." Human warships began their long journey home. Their mission complete, but their burden just beginning. The galaxy had spent 1,000 years forgetting why they once feared humanity. They had learned their lesson now they would never forget again, and somewhere, deep in the hearts of their former enemies, in the dreams of Velthari children and the nightmares of Crossian warriors and the paranoid calculations of Zentari strategists, a single truth had been burned so deeply that 1,000 generations would not be enough to erase it. Humanity does not forgive humanity. Does not forget. Humanity simply waits, and when humanity is done waiting, the universe itself learns to tremble.